Monday, June 5, 2000, 8:45 a.m., Honiara, Solomon Islands. Prime Minister Bartholomew Ulufa'alu is in his office when 6 armed men burst through the door. They're not wearing uniforms, they're carrying stolen police weapons, and they have one demand: resign immediately or face the consequences. Within hours, the capital city descends into chaos. Roadblocks appear on every street, phone lines go dead, flights are canceled, armed militants patrol with military-grade weapons. The government loses control of its own police force. This isn't a foreign invasion. This is Solomon Islanders turning against Solomon Islanders in one of the Pacific's most devastating ethnic conflicts. By day's end, the democratically elected prime minister will be held hostage. The Malaita Eagle Force, a militant group that didn't exist 2 years earlier, will control the nation's capital, and the Solomon Islands, a peaceful Pacific nation that gained independence just 22 years prior, will plunge into a civil conflict that would kill over 200 people, displace 35,000, and require international military intervention to resolve. This is the story of the 2000 Solomon Islands coup, how ethnic tensions, land disputes, government failure, and a copycat effect from neighboring Fiji combined to tear apart a nation, how a lawyer turned militant spokesman orchestrated the takeover, and how the consequences of that single day in June still echo through the Pacific today. Subscribe now, because what you're about to witness is the untold story of Paradise Lost. The Solomon Islands is an archipelago in Melanesia, east of Papua New Guinea, consisting of 6 major islands and over 340 smaller islands and atolls scattered across nearly 1,000 miles of ocean. The population in 2000 was approximately 450,000 people spread across 70 different language groups. 2 islands are central to our story: Guadalcanal, the largest island, home to the capital Honiara, and Malaita, located 60 miles northeast. Spanish explorer Álvaro de Montaña de Nera reached the islands in 1568, but significant Western contact didn't begin until the 1800s. From 1870 onward, Solomon Islanders were captured for slave labor in Queensland and Fiji sugar plantations, a brutal practice called blackbirding. In 1886, Germany and Britain divided the islands between themselves. Britain formally established the British Solomon Islands Protectorate in 1893. This colonial administration would govern for 85 years. On July 7, 1978, the Solomon Islands gained independence as a Commonwealth realm with Queen Elizabeth II as head of state, represented by a governor-general. Here's where the seeds of conflict were planted. Malaita is a mountainous, resource-poor island with limited arable land. By 1999, Malaitans comprised 30% of the nation's total population, the largest ethnic group in the country. Guadalcanal, by contrast, had fertile plains, the national capital Honiara, economic opportunities, and significantly more resources. From the 1950s through the 1990s, thousands of Malaitans migrated to Guadalcanal seeking economic opportunities. They established settlements, started businesses, and by 2000, Malaitans dominated the public service, police force, and business sector in Honiara. Indigenous Guadalcanal people who speak Gual languages and identify as Isatabu increasingly resented what they perceived as Malaitan economic domination on their own ancestral land. The fundamental issue was land. Under customary law, land in Solomon Islands is communally owned by tribal groups. It cannot be sold, only leased. Guadalcanal leaders claimed that Malaitan migrants had settled on customary land without proper compensation. They demanded removal of unauthorized Malaitan settlements, compensation for Guadalcanal people killed by Malaitans since independence, they claimed 25 deaths, relocation of the capital off Guadalcanal, and a $10 tax on every non-Guadalcanal islander living on the island. These demands were consistently ignored by successive governments, many of which were dominated by Malaitan politicians. Between 1970 and 1999, Solomon Islands' population grew by 254%, one of the fastest growth rates in the world. This massive increase intensified competition for land, resources, and economic opportunities. By 1999, unemployment was high, especially among young men. The economy was struggling, government services were inadequate, and ethnic resentments were reaching boiling point. In December 1998, a shadowy guerrilla organization emerged, calling itself the Guadalcanal Revolutionary Army, GRA. They would later rename themselves the Isatabu Freedom Movement, IFM. Led by Harold Keke and other Guadalcanal militants, the IFM launched violent raids against Malaitan settlements in rural Guadalcanal. Their tactics included attacking villages and forcing Malaitans to flee, burning homes and destroying property, setting up roadblocks to control movement, targeting Malaitan-owned businesses. In one documented incident from September 1999, paramilitary police opened fire on fishermen, killing Robert Rosal in shallow water near his village. The violence escalated rapidly. By mid-1999, an estimated 20,000 Malaitans had fled Guadalcanal, becoming internally displaced refugees. Many crowded into Honiara or returned to Malaita, traumatized and angry. Bartholomew Ulufa'alu, born in Malaita in 1939, had become Prime Minister in August 1997 on a reform platform. He promised to end corruption, implement fiscal discipline, and modernize government. But when ethnic violence erupted, Ulufa'alu faced an impossible situation. As a Malaitan himself, any strong action against Guadalcanal militants would look like ethnic favoritism, but failing to act meant abandoning 20,000 displaced Malaitans. In June 1999, Ulufa'alu's government declared a state of emergency, granting sweeping powers of arrest and detention without trial. They imposed media censorship, including 2-year jail sentences for publishing material deemed to cause racial or communal disharmony. These authoritarian measures failed to stop the violence. In December 1998, the Honiara peace accord was signed, calling for militants to disarm. It was followed by the Panatina Accord on August 12, 1999, further detailing commitments. Neither accord worked. The IFM and emerging Malaitan countergroups refused to disarm. Fighting continued. A Commonwealth monitoring group, primarily Fijian and Vanuatuan police, was deployed but proved ineffective. The monitors themselves would be evacuated when the coup occurred. The ethnic conflict devastated the economy. Gold Ridge Mine on Guadalcanal, a major source of foreign revenue, shut down after IFM raids. Logging exports fell 13% due to roadblocks. Plantations were destroyed. Livestock was slaughtered. By 2000, GDP declined 14%. Over 8,000 jobs were lost. Government revenue collapsed. The nation was sliding toward failed state status. In early 2000, a new militant group emerged, the Malaita Eagle Force, MEF. Ostensibly formed to defend Malaitans in Honiara and protect displaced Malaitans' property on Guadalcanal, the MEF was actually a counterinsurgency militia composed of disaffected Malaitan youths, elements of the Royal Solomon Islands Police, who were predominantly Malaitan, paramilitary police field force members, and armed militants seeking revenge for IFM attacks. Their spokesperson was Andrew Nori, a lawyer, former member of parliament, and ex-minister with political ambitions. By early 2000, the MEF had raided the government police armory in Auki, Malaita's capital, stealing modern semi-automatic weapons and ammunition. The government, weakened and increasingly unable to command police loyalty, watched helplessly as two armed militias, IFM and MEF, prepared for war. On May 19, 2000, just weeks before the Solomon Islands coup, businessman George Speight and armed gunmen stormed Fiji's parliament, taking Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry and his cabinet hostage. The Fiji coup, motivated by indigenous Fijian resentment of Indo-Fijian political power, succeeded in forcing Chaudhry's resignation. Speight became an international figure. This created a dangerous precedent. Armed militias could overthrow democratically elected governments in the Pacific, and the international community would do little beyond condemning it. MEF leaders watched Fiji closely. If Speight could succeed, why couldn't they? In early 2000, the MEF began issuing ultimatums to Prime Minister Ulufa'alu. Pay $23 million in compensation to displaced Malaitans, take stronger action against the IFM, and restore Malaitan property rights on Guadalcanal. These demands were impossible. The government was bankrupt, it had lost control of security forces, and taking sides would only escalate ethnic violence. Ulufa'alu reportedly tried to secure foreign military assistance. In a desperate move revealed by Australian ABC television, he even approached Cuba, offering mining shares in exchange for military help. Cuba denied the approach. The Prime Minister also allegedly formed his own militia, called the Eagle Force, though this remains disputed. By June 2000, Ulufa'alu was a prime minister with no effective state apparatus. The police were fractured, the military didn't exist, his government was isolated. The coup's public face was Andrew Nori, son of a post-war anti-colonial nationalist leader. Nori was educated, articulate, and politically experienced. He'd served in parliament and as a minister. He'd founded his own political party, the National Front for Progress. But he'd lost political influence. Contemporary reports described Nori as a measured sort of lawyer and fiery, outspoken character, intelligent but ambitious, willing to use the ethnic crisis for political advantage. Nori would consistently deny the MEF was staging a coup, preferring terms like supervised detention and claiming they sought to restore law and order. But make no mistake, this was planned insurrection. On May 24, 2000, just weeks before the Solomon Islands coup, peace talks brokered by former Fijian Prime Minister Stephen Rabuka collapsed. Both IFM and MEF walked away. Violence escalated. The MEF declared a 14-day ceasefire on May 22. When it expired on June 5, they would act. The plan was simple but audacious. Seize control of key installations in Honiara, take Prime Minister Ulufa'alu hostage, force his resignation at gunpoint, install a more compliant government, and declare war on the IFM and drive them from Guadalcanal. Everything hinged on speed, surprise, and the complicity of Malaitan police officers who would either join them or stand aside. June 5, 2000 would be the day. 8 a.m. The seizure begins. In the pre-dawn hours of Monday, June 5, 2000, MEF militants moved into position around Honiara. Coordinating with sympathetic elements of the police field force, they prepared to execute their plan. 6 armed MEF gunmen burst into Prime Minister Bartholomew Ulufa'alu's office. Accounts vary on exact details, but multiple sources confirm Ulufa'alu was taken at gunpoint and placed in protective custody, a euphemism for hostage. Andrew Nori immediately went on Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation (SIBC) radio, monitored by officials in Wellington, New Zealand. His message was carefully worded. The MEF had taken the Prime Minister into protective care to force his resignation. This was about restoring law and order, not a coup. While Ulufa'alu was held under armed guard, MEF forces, estimated at several dozen heavily armed militants, rapidly seized key installations. Police stations across Honiara, with assistance from Malaitan police officers. Government Telecommunications Center, cutting phone lines. The Central Police Station, the national headquarters. The police armory, accessing even more weapons. Key road intersections where they established roadblocks. Communications with the outside world were severed. Flights into and out of the country were canceled. A curfew was imposed. Witnesses reported seeing armed, masked MEF fighters, some in stolen police uniforms, patrolling the streets. Shop owners boarded up their businesses. Residents stayed indoors. Honiara, a city of 50,000, was under militant control. As news reached the outside world, reactions varied. New Zealand Foreign Minister Phil Goff condemned the takeover. Mr. Ulufa'alu was made Prime Minister by legitimate and democratic process and should only lose his position in the same manner. Australia initially hesitated. Foreign Minister Alexander Downer argued it was an internal affair. Prime Minister John Howard stated any response must be consistent with recognizing the rights of countries ultimately to make decisions about their own future. The United States condemned the coup but took no action. The European Union threatened to cancel all aid, 25% of the Solomon Islands government budget, if the country were ruled by unconstitutional means. This threat mattered. Andrew Nori withdrew his initial 5 a.m. deadline for Ulufa'alu's resignation. For 9 days, Bartholomew Ulufa'alu remained under house arrest, guarded by heavily armed MEF militants. He was escorted under guard to meetings with his own cabinet caucus. He met with Governor-General Sir John Lopley. Throughout, MEF weapons were visible, the threat unmistakable. According to Minister of State Alfred Sisako, Ulufa'alu offered to resign if that is the price for peace in the Solomon Islands. But he insisted on doing so through proper parliamentary procedure, not at gunpoint. Finally, on June 14, 2000, 9 days after being taken hostage, Bartholomew Ulufa'alu formally resigned before Parliament. The coup had succeeded. The new government. On June 28, 2000, Parliament elected Manasseh Sogavare, former leader of the opposition, as the new Prime Minister. Ironically, Sogavare had been raised to power by the very coup he publicly condemned. His government, called the Coalition for National Unity, Reconciliation and Peace, was formed under the shadow of armed militants who still controlled the capital. The MEF had gotten what they wanted, a more compliant government. Sogavare's government immediately paid the MEF $1.6 million in compensation for Malaitan property losses, essentially buying them off and legitimizing the coup. Rather than ending conflict, the coup escalated it. The IFM refused to recognize the new government, viewing it as the illegitimate product of a coup. They intensified attacks on Malaitan settlements. The MEF, emboldened by success, launched Operation Eagle Storm, a military offensive against IFM-controlled territory in rural Guadalcanal. Civilians suffered horrifically. Deliberate killings of non-combatants, torture and rape became common. Abductions and forced disappearances, villages burned and looted. Internally displaced persons swelled to over 35,000. Amnesty International documented numerous atrocities. Guadalcanal prisoners beaten at MEF camps in Honiara, Malaitans taken to IFM panel beating shops, torture centers, and civilian non-combatants killed by both sides. As lawlessness consumed Honiara, foreign nationals fled. Australia deployed HMS Tobruk and prepared SAS units for potential evacuation operations. Hundreds of expatriates were evacuated. Major industries shut down. Honiara's population collapsed from 50,000 to approximately 20,000 as residents fled the violence. Shops closed. Power was rationed because the electricity authority couldn't pay fuel bills. The IFM destroyed the water treatment plant. The capital of a sovereign nation had become a war zone. After months of Australian and New Zealand diplomatic pressure, all parties agreed to peace talks in Townsville, Australia. On October 15, 2000, the Townsville Peace Agreement was signed by the Solomon Islands government, Malaita Eagle Force, Isatabu Freedom Movement, Malaita Provincial Government, and Guadalcanal Provincial Government. Key provisions included general amnesty for militia members, except for those who refused to surrender weapons. Weapons to be surrendered within 30 days. Stockpiling remaining arms on home islands under monitoring. Provincial autonomy increased through constitutional reform. Development projects promised to both Malaita and Guadalcanal. The agreement essentially institutionalized ethnic division rather than resolving underlying tensions. By the time the Townsville Agreement was signed, over 200 people had been killed, 35,000 internally displaced. The economy had contracted by 14%, 8,000 jobs lost, government institutions collapsed, rule of law evaporated. The violence officially ended, but the trauma would last generations. The Townsville Agreement brought temporary calm, but tensions remained. Armed militants kept weapons despite promises to disarm. Criminal gangs emerged in the security vacuum. Government capacity remained minimal. By 2003, the situation deteriorated again. Prime Minister Alan Kemakeza requested international assistance. On July 24, 2003, the Regional Assistance Mission to Solomon Islands, RAMSI, was deployed, an Australian-led coalition including New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and other Pacific nations. RAMSI included 2,200 military personnel, police advisors, legal and governance specialists, economic and development experts. Their mandate was restore law and order, rebuild institutions, and strengthen governance. RAMSI would remain for 14 years, finally withdrawing in June 2017. It cost over $2 billion and represented the Pacific's largest security operation. The immediate perpetrators of the 2000 coup faced little accountability. Andrew Nori and other MEF leaders benefited from the Townsville Agreement's amnesty provisions. Bartholomew Ulufa'alu never returned to the prime ministership, though he served again in Parliament and briefly as finance minister in 2006. Manasseh Sogavare, elevated by the coup, would serve as prime minister multiple times, including during the November 2021 riots that required Australian police intervention, eerily echoing 2000. The factors that caused the 2000 coup, land disputes, ethnic tensions, migration pressures, weak governance, economic inequality, were never truly resolved. The Bikitawa Declaration, adopted by Pacific Islands Forum in October 2000, specifically to prevent future coups, has rarely been invoked. In November 2021, when riots again engulfed Honiara, Australia sent police within 24 hours, but critics argued the violence could have been prevented if regional early warning mechanisms had functioned properly. Some analysts see 2021 as history repeating itself, the same underlying tensions erupting in familiar patterns. The 2000 Solomon Islands coup occurred within weeks of Fiji's coup, no coincidence. Both demonstrated the fragility of Pacific democracies, the persistence of ethnic tensions, and the ease with which armed groups could overthrow elected governments. Both coups also revealed Australia's ambivalence about intervention. Initially reluctant to act, Australia eventually became the dominant security provider in both countries, raising questions of sovereignty, neo-colonialism, and the responsibilities of regional powers. June 5, 2000 was a single day, but its impact echoes across decades. 6 armed men took a prime minister hostage. A lawyer turned militant became a kingmaker. An ethnic conflict that had simmered for years exploded into open warfare, and a young Pacific democracy learned that institutions, once broken, require years, sometimes decades, to repair. The 2000 Solomon Islands coup was not inevitable. Multiple points existed where different choices, by politicians, by community leaders, by regional powers, could have prevented violence. But those choices weren't made. Grievances festered, dialogue stopped, armed militants filled the vacuum left by weak governments. Today, the Solomon Islands remains fragile, ethnic tensions persist, economic challenges continue, and the memories of that violent year, of families displaced, lives lost, and democracy suspended at gunpoint, shape the nation's politics still. The coup's most important lesson is simple. Democracy, rule of law, and peaceful coexistence require constant work. They're not permanent achievements, but daily choices. When institutions weaken, when dialogue stops, when ethnic divisions are exploited rather than managed, violence becomes possible. The Solomon Islands learned this lesson the hard way. Let's hope the Pacific and the world was paying attention.